When Roy Leland came back from the war, he didn't talk much. Not about the places he'd been. Not about the men who didn't come back. Not about the reasons his right hand trembled when he wasn't holding a screwdriver. He came back, hung his army coat on a rusted nail in his mother's kitchen, and told her, "I think I want to fix things." She blinked. "Like what?" He shrugged. "Whatever hums. Whatever lights up. Whatever people throw away too soon." 3 months later, he opened a tiny repair shop on the corner of Main and Walnut, in the shadow of the clock tower that still ran 4 minutes fast. The sign above the door read, "Leland Repairs, Radios, Records, Clocks, and more." Locals joked the "and more" meant he didn't know what he was doing. But anyone who walked through the door knew better. Roy could fix nearly anything, but he also had a way of fixing people, even if they didn't know they were broken when they walked in. The shop wasn't much. One long counter, shelves lined with old tubes and half-disassembled toasters, the steady scent of dust, solder, and warm wood. A radio always played in the corner, never too loud, tuned to a jazz station out of Chicago that came through clear after 7 p.m. He worked alone, wore the same gray shirt every day, smiled the way someone does when they're thinking of something kinder than this world. Kids in town called him the quiet guy. Old men called him the fellow with the hands. But women, especially the older ones, brought him everything from humming lamps to broken music boxes just for an excuse to see how gently he held things. He wasn't handsome in the movie star way, but there was something in the way he listened that made you feel like a secret worth keeping. I was 8 the first time I wandered into his shop. Had a broken toy walkie-talkie. Didn't want my dad to know I'd left it in the rain. Roy didn't ask how it happened. Just took it in his hands, opened the back, and said, "Well, let's see if it still wants to talk." That sentence stuck with me for years. Like objects had opinions. Like silence wasn't always the end. 20 minutes later, the little unit buzzed, cracked, and finally whispered, "Testing, testing." I smiled wider than I'd ever smiled for a school photo. He didn't charge me. Just nodded, handed it back, and said, "Don't talk into it during thunderstorms." It might answer. I never forgot that. Roy had customers, but not a lot. His prices were fair, sometimes too fair. He fixed radios that weren't worth the tubes he replaced, and clocks that hadn't ticked since the Hoover administration. But people came back. Over and over. Not just because their appliances kept breaking, but because Roy had a way of making silence feel safe. You could sit there and watch him work, no pressure to speak. And if you did say something, he'd nod like you'd just solved something important. One Wednesday in April of 1949, Mrs. Darlene Ferris came in with a broken fan and left with a heart half-mended. She'd just lost her husband. 37 years of marriage, gone with one winter cough. She said she came in for the fan, because the noise it makes when it runs sounds like him sleeping. Roy nodded, took it gently, and said, "Let's keep the rhythm but lose the rattle." She blinked. Then tears. And for the next 20 minutes, she told him stories she hadn't told anyone at the church. He listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't fix the fan too quickly. When she left, she said, "I think I'll sleep better tonight." That's how it went with Roy. He never advertised. Never raised his voice. But he became a kind of confession box for the broken-hearted. A man who fixed things on the outside, but always left something a little stronger on the inside. Of course, not everyone liked him. Some men in town called him soft, said he was too gentle for a man who saw war. But Roy didn't mind. He kept fixing things, and people kept coming. And over time, his shop became more than a shop. It became the place you went when something inside you rattled, and you didn't know how to name it yet. It was a Thursday when the boy brought in the suitcase radio. One of those heavy Zeniths from the late 30s, the kind soldiers carried across oceans and back, hoping to catch a song or a voice from home. The leather was worn, one clasp missing, and the antenna had snapped off at the base like a limb that didn't grow back. Roy took one look and said, "That's a long way from working." The boy, maybe 17, maybe younger, just nodded. He didn't say much. Just stood there in a wrinkled shirt, hands stuffed in his pockets, eyes fixed on the counter like he was measuring silence. "Was it your father's?" Roy asked. The boy hesitated. Then, "Sort of." Roy didn't push. He never did. He placed the radio on the workbench and began the ritual. Unfasten, unscrew, unfold. The insides were a mess. Rusted coils, a frayed power cord, dust thick enough to muffle memory. He cleaned each part slowly, like he was trying to remember something through touch. The boy watched from the stool by the window. He didn't blink much, just listened. Roy spoke while soldering. "This model's a transoceanic. Picked up stations from across the world when it worked right." The boy nodded. Roy continued, "I knew a man once who fixed one just to hear baseball scores from Japan. Said it helped him believe time was still passing, even when he wasn't." That made the boy shift. Not speak, just shift. Roy noticed, but didn't comment. By late afternoon, the tubes were glowing again. Roy flicked the dial. Static. Then a low hum. Then faint, but unmistakable, a voice, soft and formal. "And now, the evening news, brought to you by..." The boy leaned forward like he'd just heard someone say his name. "Can I try?" he asked. Roy handed him the dial. The boy turned it slowly. Stopped on a station playing an old jazz number. Clarinet and bass, no vocals, just that smoky, late-night feel. Then he said, almost whispering, "He used to play this when he couldn't sleep." Roy paused, said nothing. "He wasn't really my father. Just the man my mom was supposed to marry before he left. He sent her this. From overseas. She kept it in the attic. Said she didn't want to throw it out, but couldn't listen to it either." Roy's hands rested on the bench. "He came back once," the boy added, "when I was 6. Stood on the porch for 5 minutes, then left. He turned the volume up, just slightly." She never said anything. Just made soup, and didn't look up all night. Roy nodded. He knew the kind of pain that didn't speak. After a while he said, "Sometimes things aren't meant to be fixed. Just understood." The boy looked down, but this one came back. Roy smiled. Yes, it did. That night, after the boy left with the radio under his arm and a small piece of history humming against his side, Roy sat in the dark, listening to the same jazz station. He thought about all the things people brought into his shop. Broken clocks, bit radios, cracked voices. They came hoping he'd fix the object. But most of the time, what they really wanted was someone to hold the silence with them for a while. 2 weeks later, the boy returned. No radio this time. Just a small envelope. Inside, a photo. His mother, young, holding the Zenith radio. A man in uniform standing behind her, face partially turned. And a note that said, "She listened to it last night. Said it was the first time she dreamed in years." Roy placed the photo in a drawer beside a half-fixed metronome and an old brass key no one had claimed. Then turned off the lights and let the static fill the shop, like it always did, before something important wanted to be heard. It was late October when she walked in. Wind chased yellow leaves down Main Street. The sky had that particular grayness that feels older than it should, and Roy was elbow-deep in a busted floor fan from the Methodist parsonage. The doorbell jingled. He looked up and froze. 30 years vanished in a blink. Her name was Marion Fletcher. At least it had been, back then. She wore a green wool coat, gloves even though the day wasn't that cold, and a look that said she'd practiced this visit in her head for weeks, maybe months. Roy stood, wiped his hands on a towel that still smelled like solder. "Hi," she said. It was the same voice, just softer now, like someone had turned the volume knob too far right and it stuck there. He swallowed. "Hey, Mare." It came out more fragile than he meant. She didn't bring anything broken, not physically. But when she pulled an envelope from her purse and set it on the counter, it trembled. "This was in my father's shed," she said. "It's yours." Roy didn't reach for it. Not yet. He just stared at her. Hair lighter, posture straighter. The years had made her elegant, but the sadness in her eyes hadn't aged a day. "I wasn't sure if you'd still be here," she added. "I wasn't sure you remembered where I was," he said. She smiled briefly. Then, "I always knew. I just wasn't ready to see you." The envelope contained a letter, his own handwriting, dated July 2nd, 1946. He remembered writing it at 3 a.m. with hands that couldn't stop shaking. He had mailed it to her father's house after the train pulled away, certain it would be the beginning of something. It never got a reply. "I never read it," she said. He looked up, surprised. "My father found it. He burned the first page and hid the rest. Said I'd moved on. Said it would confuse things." It would have answered a lot, Roy said. She nodded. "I know." They sat in silence. She didn't cry. He didn't either. But the air between them was thick, like radio static before a signal comes through. Eventually she said, "I thought about you every time I heard a radio hum. Every time the tubes warmed and the music started. You were the first thing that ever made me feel steady." Roy looked down. "I came back for you. I know. You weren't there. I know." She stood, brushed imaginary dust from her coat. "I don't expect you to fix anything," she said. He almost smiled. "That's not what I do," he replied. "Not really." But even as he said it, he wished he could. She turned to leave, paused, then looked back. "You were the only thing that ever felt safe," she said. "I just didn't know how to choose safety back then." He watched her walk out, the bell chiming behind her like the end of a song. That night, he didn't turn on the jazz station. Didn't fix anything. Just sat at his bench, holding the half-burned letter like it was still warm from her father's hand. Some things don't need to be repaired, just acknowledged. And sometimes the only way to mend the past is to sit with it in silence until it hums again, 2 weeks passed after Marion walked out of Roy's shop, and in that time, nothing broke. No radios. No clocks. No tape decks, typewriters, phonographs, or toasters. The town, as if by some silent agreement, gave him space. But it wasn't the kind of space Roy wanted. It was too wide. Too still. Like the moments after a song ends, when you're not sure whether to clap or cry. Roy started coming in later. Left earlier. The jazz station, usually humming in the background, stayed quiet. The workbench grew dust at its edges, something he'd never allowed before. He fixed what needed fixing. But he didn't open the door wide like before. Didn't make small talk. Didn't listen the way he used to. It was like Marion had taken something with her when she left, something that hadn't even belonged to her. But maybe she was just returning what he'd once tried to bury. One morning, a girl came in with a broken tape recorder. Said it belonged to her grandfather. Roy opened it, scanned the guts, and said, "Just needs a belt." She smiled. "Do you think he'll still recognize the voice on it?" Roy paused. "Sometimes, the voice is what outlives everything else." He fixed it in 12 minutes. She paid an exact change. He didn't write her name on the ticket. He never forgot it anyway. Later that afternoon, he took out the letter Marion had returned. The one he wrote in 1946. Still missing the first page, the top edge burned away. Still carrying the words that came straight from a 23-year-old heart, unsure, unfiltered, unguarded. "I don't know what kind of man I'll become. But I know the only version of myself I like is the one beside you." He reread it 3 times, then opened the drawer where he kept a new yellow legal pad. He stared at it for a long time, then wrote, "Marion, you don't owe me answers, but I owe you the one thing I never gave, the truth after the silence. You were the best part of me, and I've been trying to fix that hole ever since." He folded the page. Didn't sign it. Just placed it in the envelope. Sealed it. Didn't mail it. That night, he closed early. Walked the 2 blocks to the edge of town where the lake met the back of the orchard. He hadn't been there since before the war. The wind smelled like pine and copper. The moon dragged silver across the water like a promise it might keep this time. He sat on the bench. Opened a small transistor radio he'd brought from the shop. Turned the dial. Jazz. Soft. Smoky. Just the way he remembered. He leaned back and listened. Not for words. Just for what lived between them. The next morning, he arrived early. Wiped the bench. Dusted the shelves. Organized the tubes by size, the wires by color, the screws by thread. Then unlocked the door. And left it open. Like he used to. People noticed. Mr. Hughes came in with a toaster. Miss Palmer dropped off a typewriter ribbon. Just in case. Someone left a bouquet of wildflowers on the counter. No name. Just a note. "Thanks for helping my mom sleep again. Tea." He smiled. The bell above the door rang again. A shadow paused, then entered. It was Marion. No envelope. No letter. No words. She just held out a small portable radio. "I think it's stuck on static," she said. He nodded. "So am I," he said quietly. Then he reached for the radio. And for the first time in 30 years, he let someone watch. As he fixed his own silence.